Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. A lot of us hear that sentence and think we know exactly what Jesus means. Someone humiliates you. You endure it quietly. You don't fight back. And eventually, God lifts you up, maybe even in front of the people who brought you down. It sounds biblical. But that is not what Jesus said, because being humiliated and humbling yourself are not the same thing. And that difference is only the beginning. Jesus uses this sentence 3 different times, and when you put those moments beside each other, something strange happens. The verse becomes harder to use as a promise that one day God will make the people who hurt you watch you rise. But it also becomes far more freeing, because Jesus wasn't teaching people how to survive humiliation until God reversed the roles. He was exposing something we do when we still have a choice. And the first time he says it, the choice shows up in something almost embarrassingly ordinary, where people decided to sit. The first room is a dinner party. Luke chapter 14, verses 7 through 11. Jesus is at the home of a prominent Pharisee on the Sabbath. The text says he was being carefully watched. And while they watched him, he watched them. The guests arriving, choosing their seats. In that culture, where you sat at a banquet declared your social position to the entire room. The closer to the host, the more important you were understood to be. Everyone could read the arrangement. Everyone understood the hierarchy the moment you sat down. Choosing your seat was not a casual decision. It was a public claim about how much you believed you mattered, made in front of people who would remember where you ended up. And this was a meal at the home of a Pharisee. These were not strangers. These were people who knew each other's standing, knew each other's influence, and would notice instantly if someone sat above their station. The social pressure in that room was quiet and total. The text does not describe the atmosphere beyond that, but sit there for a second with me. Imagine you walk in. The table is long. Every guest glances at the head. Nobody rushes to the far end. There is a quiet pull toward the seats that say, "I matter here," and you feel it too. Jesus watches this and tells a parable. If you are invited to a feast, do not sit in the place of honor. Someone more distinguished may arrive. The host will come and say, in front of everyone, "Give your place to this person," and you will have to stand and walk past every face that watched you arrive to the lowest seat in the room. Stay in that image for a moment, not the correction, the walk. Every step past someone who saw you choose the high seat and now watches you move down. That walk is the humiliation. And Jesus describes it on purpose because he wants you to feel the weight of what the opposite choice costs. Taking the lower seat is not painless. It costs you the position you could have claimed. It costs you the look on everyone's face when they see where you chose to end up. Instead, he says, take the lowest place. Then the host may come to you and say, "Friend, move up higher." And here is where the first reward lands. Jesus does say the host may move you up, and that when he does, you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. The text does not remove the possibility of being seen. What it does not do is authorize turning that possibility into a formula. Humble yourself now, so your enemies will be forced to watch God promote you later. The honor Jesus describes belongs to the host's judgment, in the host's timing, not to a script you get to write in advance about who will be watching when it happens. Then the line, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." And then he turns to the host, not the guests, and says something almost never included when this passage is preached. When you give a banquet, do not invite your friends, your rich neighbors. They will repay you. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the blind. They cannot repay you. He is not rewriting your literal guest list. He is asking a harder question. Do you only invest your time, your energy, your generosity in people who can return the favor? Do you only lower yourself in rooms where somebody important might notice you doing it? Do you only serve when the service will be seen? And notice where he moves the reward. Not gone, relocated. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The man stops organizing his generosity around who can pay him back today. And Jesus shifts the payment to God on a timeline no dinner guest controls. Because if humility only happens when the right people are watching, it is not humility, it is positioning. That is the first room. The verse is not about enduring pain, it is about choosing a chair. But if that were the whole story, Jesus would have said it once and moved on. He says it again. And the second time, nobody is sitting at all. The second room is a temple. Luke 18, verses 9 through 14. Luke tells you who this parable is aimed at before it begins. Some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. That is the lens. Hold it. Two men go up to the temple to pray. One is a Pharisee. One is a tax collector. Same building, same hour, same God listening. The Pharisee stands and prays about himself. Luke says the prayer was aimed inward, a man speaking, in effect, to his own record. He lists his qualifications. I fast twice a week, which was more than the law required. I give a tenth of everything I earn. I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers. And then he looks across the room at the man standing far away and adds, or even like that tax collector. He does not name him. He categorizes him. The category is enough. Everyone knows what a tax collector is. Someone who profits from collaboration with the occupying empire. Someone whose money carries a stain. The tax collector stands far off. He does not even look up toward heaven. He beats his chest. And in that culture, chest beating was not a posture of modesty or a spiritual technique. It was what people did at funerals. It was the physical expression of someone whose grief had reached their body. Imagine that distance for a second. The text does not describe the temple that morning, but picture the room. One man stands near the front, shoulders back, voice steady, speaking about himself with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed his own goodness so many times it sounds like truth. The other man stands as far from the center as the building allows. His eyes are on the floor. His hands are against his own chest. The distance between them is not about architecture. It is the distance between a man performing his best version and a man who has stopped performing altogether. And he says 7 words. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That is his entire prayer. No list of what he has done right. No comparison with anyone else in the room. No promise to improve. No negotiation. No spiritual plan. Just the truth about his own condition delivered by a man who could not even lift his face to say it. And the word behind mercy carries more weight than pity. It is a plea for God to do what he cannot do for himself. Not feel sorry for me, but act for me, because I have nothing to bring. 2 men in the same temple, the same hour, with the same God listening. One gave God a list of reasons to be impressed. The other gave God a single reason to act. I have nothing. Jesus says the tax collector went home justified before God rather than the other. Then again, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And here is the small shift that matters. Jesus says the tax collector went home justified, and immediately connects that verdict to the same warning about humbling yourself. Whatever that connection includes, no public reversal is described, no applause, no moment where the room turns to notice. The word justified means declared right, put in proper standing before God. So the first time, humility was about position, where you sit. The second time, it has nothing to do with position. It is about what you are willing to say when nobody is keeping score. Each time, one layer deeper. But there is a third room. And in this one, Jesus is not teaching a parable anymore. He is not describing imaginary characters at an imaginary dinner or two men praying in a story. He is standing in a real building, looking directly at real men, and the people he is looking at have turned the very idea of humility into something the first two rooms would not recognize. They have turned it into a show. The third room is a confrontation. Matthew 23, verse 12. This comes inside the longest rebuke Jesus ever delivered. 7 statements aimed at the scribes and Pharisees, each beginning with woe. Blind guides, whitewashed tombs, beautiful outside, full of death inside, children of those who murdered the prophets. The confrontation is public, in the temple courts, with the crowds close enough to hear every word. Right before the sequence begins, he says it one more time. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The text says these men did their deeds to be seen by others. They made their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They loved the best seats at banquets, the same competition from Luke 14, and the prominent places in the synagogues and the respectful greetings in the marketplaces. They loved to be called rabbi. Every single detail Jesus lists is about one thing: being seen. Not about doing wrong things, being tricked, about doing visible things for the purpose of being noticed doing them. You might not wear phylacteries, but you probably know what it feels like to make sure the right people see the right version of you. The prayer you mention, so someone knows you pray. The generosity you bring up in conversation so someone knows you give. The sacrifice you make sure somebody notices before you let it go unmentioned. The post that looks like vulnerability but is really a performance of depth. That instinct did not stay in the first century. It just changed outfits. So when Jesus says whoever humbles himself in this room, the humbling he describes is the refusal to perform. Not invisibility. You can serve publicly. You can lead visibly. You can live in front of people without performing. The problem is not being seen. The problem is making the seeing the point. When the reason you do the good thing is so that someone will notice you did the good thing has been swallowed by the performance. 3 rooms, 3 audiences, 1 sentence, and now the shape is clear. The first time, humility is about choosing a position, the lower seat. The second time, it is about choosing honesty, the undecorated prayer. The third time, it is about choosing freedom from performance, serving without needing the room to notice. Each one deeper than the last. Position, then honesty, then motive. And every single time, the humility is something the person chose. Never something done to them. Never imposed from outside. Never the result of being wronged by someone else. If you have been told that this verse is about enduring what life does to you, those 3 rooms have already started pulling the floor out from under that reading. Because in each one, before man zanzamint, the person who humbles himself is someone who still has options. He could take the high seat and walks to the low one. He could list his qualifications and lists his need instead. He could perform for the crowd and stops performing. The humility costs something only because the higher option was still available and the person chose not to take it. And that pattern is not an interpretation I am placing on top of the text. It is built into one word that has been sitting in the verse the entire time. Take the sentence as you know it in English. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Now take the word himself out. Read it without it. Whoever is humbled will be exalted. Feel the difference? The first sentence is about a choice. The second is about a circumstance. The first says you moved yourself down. The second says someone or something pushed you down. They sound almost identical. They are completely different promises. One says, choose the lower seat, and God will respond. The other says, endure the lower seat and God will compensate. Those are not variations of the same idea. They are two different theologies. In the Greek, that word, himself, is hauton, a reflexive pronoun. It points the action back at the subject. It is there in all three passages. It has always been there. The English translations did not hide it. You have probably read humbles himself dozens of times. The strange thing is that most of us read those two words and still hear the verse as if it said, is humiliated. That one word is the difference between a promise about what happens to victims and a promise about what happens to people who choose. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Every time the verse is quoted as a comfort for suffering, God will lift you up because they brought you down. That word is missing, not from the Bible, from the way the verse is being used. Now, I want to be careful here. The Bible absolutely addresses unjust suffering. The Psalms are full of cries for justice, Psalm 10, Psalm 35, Psalm 140, and God hears those cries. If you have been genuinely wronged, the Scriptures give you full permission to bring that before God, with anger and complete honesty. That is not in question here. But this particular verse is not about that. This verse is about the voluntary kind of lowering, the kind that costs you something you did not have to give up. And the rest of the New Testament shows you what that looks like when one person lives it out completely. Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Paul narrates what Jesus did, and the verb is the same. He was in the form of God. Paul starts at the highest possible position. Not a high position, the highest. Equal with God. And the first movement is downward. He did not consider that equality something to be seized. He emptied himself. Then further down, he took the form of a servant. Not a teacher, not a prophet, not a king arriving modestly. A servant. Someone whose entire identity is defined by the person they serve. Someone who does not choose their own schedule, their own title, their own recognition. Then, further still, born in human likeness, God in the form of a servant in the shape of an ordinary person, not arriving with visible evidence of where he came from, not carrying credentials the room could read, just a human body in a human town, learning to walk the same way every child learns to walk. And being found in appearance as a human being, he humbled himself. Same verb, same reflexive structure, and became obedient to the point of death. Not just death, death on a cross, the lowest form of execution the Roman world had, reserved for slaves and political criminals, carried out in public outside the city walls at eye level, designed to erase your dignity while the road kept moving past you. Form of God, form of servant, form of man, obedient to death, death on a cross, 5 steps down, each one lower than the last. Imagine the staircase for a moment. Not the theology, the distance. From the highest thing that exists to the lowest death a government could design. Form of God to form of servant to form of man to death on a cross. Each step lower than the one before it, and every one of them chosen. Paul could have said, Jesus was humble and moved on. He does not. He builds the staircase and walks you down it one step at a time, because the distance is the point. The gap between form of God and death on a cross is the widest voluntary descent any text in the Bible records. And Paul wants you to feel every step before he gives you the next word. And that word carries the weight of the entire passage. Therefore, because of this descent, because of this voluntary sequence of choosing lower, God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name. There is the complete pattern. Not, he was humiliated. So God corrected the injustice. But he humbled himself voluntarily from a position where he had every reason not to. And the exaltation followed, not during the descent, after it, and from the only place it could come from, not from the crowd, not from history, from God. The cross was not something that happened to Jesus despite his wishes. He said in John 10, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord." The humbling was chosen. The emptying was deliberate. James writes the same principle in 6 words. Chapter 4, verse 10. "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Yourselves. Active. You do it. Peter adds a phrase that changes the temperature. 1 Peter 5:6. "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you." At the proper time. God decides when. Not you. Not when the wound is fresh. Not when the person who hurt you happens to be watching. At the proper time, which Peter does not define, does not promise will be soon, and does not guarantee will include the audience you were imagining. Now, Psalm 23, verse 5. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." If you have spent any time online looking for encouragement after being wronged, you have encountered this verse, not as a line from a psalm about a shepherd, but as a promise that God is going to put on a show. Your enemies will watch while he lifts you up. They will see your blessing. They will understand what they lost. Entire movements have been built on that reading, and the feeling of hearing it, when you have been genuinely hurt, is powerful. It feels like justice. But the psalm tells a different story. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Not because the enemies are removed, not because the valley ends, but because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The comfort comes from the shepherd being close enough to reach. The promise of the entire psalm is presence, not spectacle. Then, the table. "In the presence of my enemies." The enemies are there. And so is God. And the table is set anyway. The table is not a stage. It is a meal. The host is not performing for the enemies. He is feeding the person sitting in front of him. Their presence does not stop God from providing. And David's last words are not about what the enemies saw. They are about where he ends up. "I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The ending is not vindication. The ending is home. When you place that next to the words of Jesus, the picture is clear. Jesus never promises that your exaltation will be staged as a public vindication for your critics. It is God's response to a person who chose to go low when going high was still available. There is something deeply human about wanting the exaltation to come with witnesses. We want the people who dismissed us to be in the room when God acts. We want the correction to be as public as the wound was. Someone said something about you. Someone left without explaining why. Someone took credit for what you built with your own hands and your own sleepless nights. Someone used a verse, maybe even this verse, to keep you small, to tell you that your pain was a setup and your job was to wait quietly while God arranged the scenery for your moment. And the desire for them to see you restored is not evil. It is not petty. It is the honest response of a person who was hurt and wants the record corrected. Every human being who has ever been overlooked or dismissed has felt this pull. It is not a spiritual failure. It is a wound asking to be acknowledged. God does not shame you for that desire. The Psalms scream it. David asks God to act against his enemies by name, repeatedly, with his full voice, without a single apology for the volume. But this verse is not about your enemies. It never was. It is about you and what you do with the seat, the prayer, and the performance when nobody is making you choose. The hardest part of this verse is not the humbling. People humble themselves every day without calling it that. They admit they were wrong when defending themselves would have been easier. They serve when there will be no recognition. They give up the need to be the most important person in the room. They forgive without building a defense first. The hardest part is not the going down. The hardest part is releasing the audience, because you can humble yourself and still be watching the door, waiting for the person who hurt you to walk in and witness your restoration. You can take the lowest seat and spend the whole meal glancing at the head of the table, calculating whether the host has noticed you yet. And if that is why you went low, to position yourself for a more dramatic entrance later, you did not humble yourself. You repositioned. Maybe that is the real relief inside this verse, underneath the version that has been piled on top of it. Not the promise that one day everyone will see, but the promise that it does not depend on everyone seeing, that the thing between you and God, the kneeling, the letting go, the choosing not to fight for the seat, does not require a single witness to be real. The plain reading of this verse was never wrong. It has always said that humility leads somewhere. What has been added, the public stage, the enemies watching, is not wrong because it is selfish. It is wrong because it is smaller than what Jesus offered. He offered something that works in a room with no one else in it. Choosing to kneel when you could have stood is not weakness trying to look noble. It is the only posture where God has consistently promised to do the lifting. If this is the kind of study that helps you see familiar scripture with clearer eyes, subscribe. That is what this channel does, one passage at a time. Of the 3 rooms where Jesus said this, the dinner party, the temple prayer, or the public confrontation, which one landed closest to where you are right now? Leave A, B, or C. The one that comes up most shapes what we look at next. If this gave you back something you did not have when you pressed play, even just the difference between 2 words you had been reading as one, someone near you is probably carrying the popular version of this verse tonight. Sending them this might be the first time anyone told them the pronoun was always there.